All right, the clock strikes 12. Straight up 12 noon. It's me, Robert Phoenix. I am back, and I am with Sam, the Miracle Man, Shelley. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Thanks for having me, Robert. Appreciate it.
So I'll tell you about how I found out about Sam. Sam reached out to me for a reading, and we had a session together. And that's when he told me his story. And I thought to myself, I think he'd make a really good guest. And we're gonna find out a lot about Sam in terms of who he is, where he came from, what kind of life he had. It's almost like the old days. It was a BC and then an AC. Now I think they changed the numerals now, the little initials. But clearly, you had that experience with your life where you were living one story, and then there was kind of an interregnum, and then you were living a different story. And we're going to find out about that. So welcome to the show again, Sam. And why don't we start with kind of the basics? Like, who are you? Where did you come from? What was your life like? And then we're going to get into the nitty gritty of all the different things that plagued you health wise.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that. And it was really good. I recommend a reading with Robert. Really give me some insights. I'm still chewing through all the insights that you gave me on my chart. It was really profound. I'm still going through it. You make a great astrological life coach. This is what's going on, and this is why it's going on. So that was really good. So basically how it started for me, I could go back to like age, 5, 6. I was extremely shy child, very shy, really kept to myself. But then it was the last day of first grade. And then it was last day of school, first grade. I heard the familiar sound of the ice cream truck. So I begged mom for money, ran out and got my ice cream. But when I was leaving the ice cream truck to cross the road, there was another car speeding down the road, a van speeding down the road that ran me over.
Wow.
So yeah, at 6 years old, I had all this head trauma, broken bones, and spent about a year in the hospital. So at that point, from that head trauma caused all these so-called mental issues, if you will. And there was no really tied psychology at that time. So I was really going through, high school was extremely difficult. School itself was very difficult. I was just, it was just constantly a battle, if you will, with my thoughts that I wasn't good enough, I wasn't worthy, all that nonsense. Then eventually, I did get some help in my late teens, early 20s when I was really depressed. Things were just really going south for me. So I was really depressed. So the first they initially diagnosed me with depression, and they gave me these medications called SSRIs. That threw me into a mania. So that was another obstacle. Then I found a doctor that diagnosed me as bipolar. So I was institutionalized twice so I didn't kill myself. Because once again, I believed all this noise up here that, life was all these stories and all these problems and issues. But so after being diagnosed with bipolar, I had a psoriasis on about a third of my body. And then the psoriasis got into my joints, which is psoriatic arthritis. Then I was so stressed out and overwhelmed with life. I had these chronic migraines because it was really going on. And I just talked about this recently, was that even though my psychiatrist saw what was going on with my bipolar, and he saw that I was getting sicker with these autoimmune diseases, he never chimed in and say, hey, why are you believing your thoughts as the truth? He just fed me more pills, more medicine, because that's, what they do. Because, when you're dealing with a lot of self-criticism, a lot of stress, the body starts attacking itself. So you start getting these autoimmune diseases. So finally, at the age of 37, my health was just continued going down, all these issues and problems. But then at age 37, I woke up one day and things were just complete. Well, actually, it started out with the worst migraine in my life. So they sent me to the ER and they said I didn't have a stroke, but to see my neurologist that I was seeing for migraines. Well, by that Monday, I couldn't walk, I couldn't see. I was a real mess. So then I was in the hospital for about 3 weeks. And then that 3 weeks, MS is a process of elimination. Like, well, you don't have this, you don't have this. So we concluded it's multiple sclerosis. So that was at age 37. So at that point, I couldn't see. My eyes were all crazy, and my left side of my body was completely numb. Walking was impossible. I couldn't even urinate on my own. My whole body was just shutting down.
Wow.
So it was a complete shutdown of my body. So after 3 weeks in the hospital, I spent another month in rehab there. Then I managed to get around with my quad cane for a while. Then my cane Then, so fast forward to 7 years later from that point, and I
So
have no.
you're 45 now, right? Roughly 45. Is that what we're talking about?
I'm 44 at this point.
44. That's the Saturn opposition, by the way, in astrology. So keep going.
Yeah. So yeah, age 44 is like, I discovered meditation. I just simply discovered meditation. And one of the benefits of meditation was inner peace. I'm like, I need that because I was dealing with all this overwhelm, all this stress. So I was never focused on my healing. I was focused simply on inner peace. And eventually, within 2 weeks, I finally saw for the first time in my life that I have these thoughts, but I'm not those thoughts. And that really changed everything for me. And for my meditation for people out there, it was very simple. 5 minutes a day of just sitting there. No particular rules or anything like this. So it was like, so I just had that discovery. Then roughly 3 months of my simple meditation practice, I just heard a voice or a strong thought say perfect spirit. It was like this Uranian moment. It's like, boom, pow, it's over, it's done. So I just had this profound insight when I heard perfect spirit. I'm like, that's it. My spirit is perfect and pure. It's simply the body and mind that are damaged. Then over the next 16 months, I was reading off all my medicine. The cane went away. My cooling vest went away from the multiple sclerosis. Like everything was going away. And so by the beginning of December 2012, that's when I was, 45. No more medicine, no diseases, no doctors, no nothing. It was all over. But it took me about 16 months to get off all that medication because I was really taking a fistful of medication each day. 13 different medications, a daily injectable, none of it today.
Wow. So let's rewind a little bit.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah,
it is a lot. I want to go back in time. And where were you living as a child? What part of the country?
Yeah, so I was living just outside Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. So when I had that accident, it was June of 1973.
Okay. So you were 6 years old, born in 1967, correct?
Yeah. So right. just first grade.
Mm-hmm. And what was your upbringing like with your parents? How did they react to your trauma? Were they indulgent? Were they concerned? What was their relationship with what you were going through at the time?
Well, my memories at the time are very fuzzy because I had this head trauma, mm-hmm. all this stuff going on. But I just remember afterwards, I can really say my mom was always in a state of worry. She was mm-hmm. constantly worried. Growing up through my whole life, she was constantly worried, constantly checking in on me. Well, of course, I nearly died that night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She was always in a constant state of worry, which worry adds to this, this noise and this nonsense. So that wasn't really a helpful energy for my mom to be constantly worried, which added to my mental difficulties. And so that was it. And I always remember my father, it was caring, but kind of standoffish. That's the best way I can describe my father is, my mom was like really tight. My father was a little more standoffish. That's the way he was. But I was the only child. So I was it.
Yeah. So when you theoretically recovered and you go back to school, were you diagnosed with like learning disabilities? Did they do the ADD stuff, the ADHD? I mean, what kind of things did you have to deal with from like an administrative level, and how they sort of typed you during that time?
They didn't type me. There was no typing in the early 70s. There was no typing. What I remember was, I left school and the first grade. I went back to school in fourth grade. Wow. So second and third grade were homeschooled.
Okay. So you didn't have those social skills that theoretically you develop in those early years, for better or worse, right? Bonding, learning how to discern, dealing with things like bullies and stuff. You were kind of MIA for that. So you get reinserted back into that environment.
Right.
What was that like for you?
It was traumatic. That's the best way I can describe it. It was traumatic because basically for that, a couple of years, I was isolated. I was mostly alone. My parents were in my bedroom when I was home recovering all the time, or they were in the hospital all day, so I was mostly alone. And what I remember was I went back to fourth grade, but then my parents moved, so I had to repeat fourth grade. So I went from one school district to another, and they made me repeat fourth grade. So that was really traumatic, repeating a grade. Then you're naturally shy. I was naturally shy to begin with. Now you throw me into a new neighborhood where I don't have friends, a new school system. It just added more isolation, more noise. I just remember a lot of time in my childhood, spending time alone doing either models or paint by numbers. I remember doing that, and just really any kind of activities I could do myself. I was really happy just being by myself.
Right. Sort of a classic introversion, and nothing wrong with that. I mean, you were sort of developing in a way that allowed you to cope and not have to deal with a lot of this extreme stimuli that obviously was probably challenging for you, because not only were you out of the social situation and the bonding and all the things that take place during those formative years, but you're still dealing with this theoretical disability and having to put your head back together again as well. So you needed that space, right?
Yeah, I needed the space, right, to do that, but it was still, it's like going from a neighborhood where I had my local friends to like someplace where you don't know anyone. So it was really isolating. And then school was just very difficult for me, because I was always in this comparison mode that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't measure up, which added more to my head trash, as I call it. I just kept piling it on, and it just kept getting worse through high school and grade school. And
how did you do academically? Were you able to keep up, or was that a problem or challenge for you?
No, academically, it was never an issue. I had no problems with my intelligence or keeping up. It was just really the social skills simply weren't there. And I know, too, if I wasn't interested in the topic, I really didn't study it and barely passed those areas because I just wasn't interested in those.
So when did they start to prescribe drugs for you? Like at what age?
It wasn't until I was probably in my early 20s or around 20, because there's really no help coming from me. I remember it distinctly in high school. I was being my manic, crazy self. They sent me to the principal's office. He simply asked me if I smoked marijuana. I said no, and he dismissed me.
That's it.
That was it.
Right. He's okay. He's not on the Chiba. He's okay. What would be an example of your crazy manic self? What would that look like?
I would just be arguing the whole class over something trivial. I would just really argue with the whole class. Somebody that's really shy, introvert, will suddenly argue with the whole class.
Interesting. Yeah. So you moved through high school, and you attended college. Is that right?
I went to a 2-year school.
Your school. And I'm assuming that's around 18, 19, moving into your 20s, yes?
Yeah, 18 to 20, yeah.
Right. And that's when you start to get diagnosed, and that's when the SSRIs begin to pop up, right?
Yeah. That's when, but those kind of pills didn't stay long, because like I said, I was one from extremely depressed. It's sort of like going from school to the real world. That was more trauma, if you will. Like, now I have to get a job, support myself, just another sort of more baggage adding on to it.
Right.
So it was getting that, and then getting the job, and just let me really depressed. And I got more and more depressed. That's why I started to see a psychologist, who sent me a psychiatrist who diagnosed with depression. Then they started giving me these SSRIs, and it just made me through mania. And it was just really just another nightmare. Then after that, I became suicidal and had to be institutionalized and kill myself. And then eventually I found a doctor who actually spent like 3 hours with me and figured out what was going on. Then he called me a bipolar, and it took me like 5 years to get the medicine right. So it was a really an adventure at that point. And he sort of freaked out at the end there, when it was like 44. And I told him like, I'm off almost some of my medicines now. He was a little freaked out by that, but then.
So were you on multiple SSRIs like Zoloft, lithium? What was the grocery list there?
Oh, it was a grocery list. Like I definitely did lithium for a little bit. I was part of a clinical trial for lithium, and that just made me more depressed. So that wasn't too good. I'm trying to remember, like, I was on Paxil. I was on all this stuff, and eventually I wasn't on any of that stuff. I was more on like these neurologic drugs like Neurontin, Lamictal, Zoloft, and antipsychotic Zoloft. And then the cocktail I was taking was really sadistic. That's the way I see it, because with the MS, you have the chronic fatigue. So I'll be taking Provigil in the morning to wake up, then I'll be taking Ambien and at night to sleep. So it was really this weird combination, like, here's a medicine to wake up, here's a medicine to sleep. And my body wasn't a natural rhythm at all. I had all this medicine fog, adding more to the confusion. It was just really, I don't recommend the medical system for most people. It's really barbaric at times.
Yeah, well, when they brought the DSM into sort of our awareness, it's also around the same time where all the SSRIs begin to be produced and get ramped up. So the two kind of go hand in glove, right? Well, now we can diagnose you, and they've got a diagnosis for just about everything now. Oh, and guess what? Now we have the chemical correlation for that. So you were kind of at the beginning of those trials, really. Right?
Yeah. It's beginning of that. And it really described it well. I saw Sherry Sweeney on your show not too long ago. In this book here, really talks about the barbarianism of early psychiatry. That's what it really reminded me of, when I was reading that book, the amazing journey into the psychotic mind and the 50 years of the history they were going through with psychiatry. And I don't think it's much better today.
No, it's probably worse. Did you ever get into any like group therapy or group encounter work? Was that part of your regimen, or were you just more one-on-one with your psychiatrist?
Mostly one-on-one. I found a few support groups on my own, but I really found what I didn't like about the support groups, they were just complaining and talking about things that were going wrong in their life. It wasn't uplifting. It was, those groups were really found to be a downer. People were just talking about all their issues and problems, especially the multiple sclerosis support groups. Because, a lot of people are disabled in there and life just does not function well when you're dealing with MS.
Yeah. And we're going to get into the real transformative sort of moments that you encountered and how that all worked. But, I've talked about this before. When I went through a period where I was obsessed with Morgellons because I had a lot of weird body issues. There were things going on that I couldn't explain. And so I would get into these really deep sort of forums around Morgellons where people were doing really cutting edge research and coming up with stuff. And that was sort of a big part of my life because I was trying to understand and explain why these things were happening to me. But at some point I just decided, okay, I've had enough of this. Like I had to cut it off. And I noticed that when that happened, the instance of the phenomena in my body began to slow down, not completely become eradicated, but slow down. And the manifestation of these strange symptoms began to abate. So I think there's a lot of truth to what you're sharing here, especially when you get into a group situation like your MS group, and there's this group thought or this group mind, and sometimes it's well-intentioned, but everybody's reaffirming each other's story and each other's narrative.
Yes. Yeah, it's really, those groups are not very helpful, especially when I walk through those groups as newly diagnosed with MS and you hear all these horror stories, what they're going through. Oh, it's the worst. It makes you really depressed to hear what they're going through. It is that group think, that group mentality. And we see that all throughout society today, all this group think. It's really creating so many issues today.
It's strangulating the individual's ability to be inspired, right? Which is to breathe in. I mean, it's strangulating our ability to be inspired, and it's strangulating our ability to expire and to breathe out and to speak and talk and gesture and articulate and communicate. The group thought or the group think is like this noxious cloud that's descended upon us. And you cut through that. You cut through all these different assumptions, these medical assumptions, these chemical assumptions. You cut through that, which is really, really interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the MS. How far along were you, and what were some of the more outward symptoms of that?
Well, the MS, the most outward symptom of the MS, was when I was first diagnosed, was obviously, seeing me with a cane. That was the most obvious thing. That here I am, mid-30s, and we're using a cane because MS is the number one cause of disability among young adults. And it's because of that group think. And, it's like, I remember, when I was doing physical therapy for MS, They would literally have you do 5 or 10 minutes of physical therapy and tell you, oh, you're tired, go rest. Go back to your room and rest for an hour after 5 minutes or 10 minutes of activity. So even the way they prescribe therapy adds to this restrictions. Like then you get these belief system. Oh, I did something. Now I got to be. Now I'm supposed to be tired. Now I need to go rest. So that doesn't help your recovery at all. So it doesn't really encourage you. I mean, I could have really opted out that point as like I could just get disability now and forget about working or doing anything and just be a whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right. Was there ever any connection or correlation between the SSRIs, your nervous system, your neurological operating system in your brain, and the MS? Was there any connection there, and is there any connection?
No, well, I would say there is a way in a connection to like the bipolar depression to MS. And I talked about this before because you're dealing with depression, bipolar, you're really getting yourself in a very stressed out state. You're really dealing with a lot of self-criticism that you're not good enough. And I really see autoimmune diseases as a self-hate disease, a self-criticism disease. So it's really fueling that. It makes you more susceptible to those autoimmune diseases because it's all this stuff up here creates all those stress hormones, and the body does not do well with stress. So I was so stressed out. That was like, I'm just really thankful for today for MS for really getting me to shut down, really deal with me to learn who I was. That I couldn't be manic anymore and run around like a bipolar. You know, I couldn't really get out there. I was like forced to deal with me and my own thoughts. I couldn't escape. I couldn't escape from myself. Before I could distract myself. Now I really couldn't do much when I was with MS. I was the couch potato. You know, for 6-7 months after a diagnosis, I really couldn't do anything besides watch TV and just veg. And I remember when I first got out of rehab, I really still couldn't see, so I really just listened to TV.
Wow. So you were really incapacitated. I mean, you were on the way to becoming vegetative.
Yeah, I was definitely there.
Wow. So I'm assuming that you were on some kind of government assistance or disability. You weren't working during this time, were you?
No, I was fortunate though. I had a good corporate job, so I had good insurance for them. So they were actually paying for my short-term disability. Mm-hmm. But actually at that time, I actually made the effort to get myself back to work and just sort of fight through it. So I did that. But at that point, I could have opted out and say, no, just give me federal disability and be done with it.
Mm-hmm. And what was your immediate environment like? Again, I'm sure you've got your parents maybe in the background somewhere, whatever kind of social group or network that you have. I mean, were they supportive? Were they taking compassion, pity? Were they reaffirming the story that everybody else was affirming, at least from the medical side of things?
Well, my parents were supportive. My mom was really supportive, but I was married to my first wife then, and she was everything but supportive. Like I told her all the stuff I needed at the house, like disability, like aids to make my life easier, you know, like getting like the shower seats and all this kind of equipment in the house so I can at least function. She got none of that. So the day I come to the hospital, she's dragging me around to all these stores to buy stuff. And I'm in no shape whatsoever to be running around all over the stores to do this. So my first wife was not supportive at all. It was like a real struggle, real fight to get the things I needed to at least function. And that was too, when I got out, it was middle of the summer and MS and heat don't mix. And she's dragging me around all over the place. And I was like, why didn't you do this before? Why? She's like, I didn't want to buy the wrong thing. I'm like, anything would be better than no thing.
Right. So how long were you married?
I was married for 22 years.
Wow. So that was your first wife. And so how much of that, or that relationship in your marriage, was also adding to your psychological and neurological stress?
I was just adding more to it. It was just adding a lot more because, you know, I had the good corporate paying jobs. She would always take the low paying, easy jobs, if you will. So I always have the high pressure, high stress jobs, and she would just do whatever because we're really living on my income for the most part. I provided most of the income. But the thing, you know, by the time I got healthy, I mean, fully recovered my health, within a year of recovering my health, I was divorced.
Right, because you were in a different state of mind, a different state of consciousness, different vibration. let's talk about the meditation piece. Did you get into TM? Was that where you started, or some other kind of meditation?
No, I tell people I was really fortunate I never had a spiritual teacher. If you told my OCD bipolar brain there's rules to meditation, I would still be locked in my mind. Am I doing this right? Am I sitting properly? Am I holding my hands properly? Breathing properly? All those kind of rules. But I simply read a book. Well, we can go back a little bit how I discovered meditation. Because since I was a couch potato, I watched a lot of TV. So I used to watch a lot of ghost hunting shows. So, but I know if it was real or fake, but I saw an event, close to me. So, well, I can go there. I can see what this is all about. And I had some experiences I couldn't explain. So I simply, one day when I went there, I just had a flashlight going on and off by itself, according to questions. So it was really puzzling to me, but I just didn't let it go. I was really curious and naturally curious. So I start to read some books, about the paranormal and things like that. I think there's a book from a medium where they talked about, I think 2 or 3 pages about meditation. And one of the benefits of meditation they talked about was inner peace. I'm like, that's it. I need meditation for inner peace because I'm so stressed. I'm so overwhelmed. So I had no concept of healing. I simply wanted inner peace. And they didn't really give any instructions for meditation. It was just like sort of sit quietly. So that's what I did. That's how I began. For the first 2 weeks of meditation, I sat for 5 minutes a day, but I was under the impression that meditation means you stop thinking. But then after 2 weeks, I realized when I tell the mind to stop think, it's a thought chasing a thought. So it's like, oh, okay, it's about letting thoughts just be. And then I just learned to where are my feet? Where are my hands? Is just keep coming back to the present moment. So that was my simple meditation practice. It was just 5 minutes a day of just learning to be present. I didn't even really know what I was doing. I was just marching to my own drummer, I guess you could say. And that's what I really help people to see, that you have this knowledge within you. If you can get this out of the way, you know what's best for you. You live in that body. You know your recipe. So I simply help people get out of this craziness so they can really tap into their own wisdom. So that was for me, that simple 5 minutes. And by the 3rd month, I was doing 10 minutes twice a day of just sitting there, keeping myself present. And that's one evening after my meditation, I simply heard that voice or strong thought. I'm not really sure how to call it, just say perfect spirit. And that was the right time for me. Because if I heard that earlier in my journey, I'd be like, oh, now I'm going schizophrenic. Let me go back to the psychiatrist and see what's going on. Right. But it wasn't any of that. It was simply, realizing that's it. I'm a perfect spirit. You're a perfect spirit. Everyone watching is a perfect spirit. And we simply forget that we are that because we're so caught up in our opinions, our beliefs, our thoughts, our stories. But we're all perfect spirits. So when I had that, it was like a big aha moment, hearing perfect spirits. And I realized that's it. The spirit is perfect. It's simply the body and mind that are damaged. And I simply had a deep, deep knowing that all is well. And that all is well carried me through when I was going through tapering my medicines, because that wasn't the easiest. My body was very addicted to that stuff. So I was going through some pretty interesting withdrawal symptoms when I was going through that. But I knew that was my path. But I said, everybody has their own path. For me, it was my own path. And when I tell my doctors that with this, they were just sort of freaking out and not being very supportive. So I stopped seeing them because I simply have my own wisdom, just marching to my own drummer. And it's just like, they're not part of my journey now. I was taking all these medicines, seeing them for years. I wasn't getting better. My health was actually on the decline. At that point, my MS was going from relapsing, remitting to secondary progressive, which means with relapsing, remitting, you get ups and downs. Relapsing, remitting is just a slow, steady decline.
So what were some of your side effects with withdrawing from these SSRIs? What were you going through?
Well, it wasn't the SSRIs. They were only very short in my journey for depression. That was it. So that was very early in my thing. It was more like the anti-anxiety medicines. That actually had to work with a doctor to get off of that because my body was so addicted to the diazepam. It was really addicted to that. So he gave me tips and suggestions. It was actually my rheumatologist helped me get off of that one. But he worked with me on that. He was a good guy. He really helped me. He probably the only doctor that was supportive of me getting off medicine. But he told me how to get off this one drug because it was like, I don't know, it's really hard to describe, like the shakes, the headaches. It was just like my body was like, give me. And I was like, no. So it was, shaking, headaches. Really what I remember most is headaches from that.
Yeah, the benzos are no joke. I mean, Jordan Peterson got laid out by his benzo addiction, and in order for him theoretically to kick it, he had to go to Russia because both Canadian and American doctors were not interested in getting him off them. So he had to go, cold turkey. I think he was actually put into a medical coma because of his addiction to diazepam. So that's not an easy thing to do. Your meditation experience is quite interesting because it feels to me like you found the guru within, right? You found that teacher within yourself.
Right. That's what I'm trying to find. Help everybody find that teacher within themselves. If you get this out of the way, which I call the head trash, the mental junk drawer, then there's our own wisdom that's it's always there whispering to us, and we don't hear it because this is screaming at us.
Right.
Once we get this quiet, then we can hear that intuitive voice.
So prior to your meditation foray, would you consider yourself a spiritual person, a religious person, atheistic, non-believer? Kind of where were you on that spectrum?
Pretty much a non-believer on that spectrum because, I had an interesting experience when I was in the hospital with, being suicidal. My uncle came into the hospital. He was an evangelical pastor. He tried to cast the demons from my head. That sort of pushed me away from religion at that point. He got me into the room, put his hands on my head, and was just casting out demons. I thought this was a little bizarre, a little strange.
Right. That's interesting. So this is really just kind of an organic experience. I mean, I've read other stories that are kind of similar, where people who there was this famous guy who, well, he wasn't really famous. I think his name was Lord Trevelyan, and he was this guy that used to be at Findhorn, and he wound up he was this total science guy. He was not into any kind of spiritual phenomenon, but he wound up actually meeting Pan, like in the forests in and around Findhorn in Scotland. And I think he wrote a book like the Conversations with Pan or something like that. And it's interesting when somebody who does not have kind of this spiritual or religious outlook, and then they have this experience, it's actually quite profound in a lot of ways.
It's very profound. Yeah, because, after I had a huge shift the last day of November of 2012. I was doing yoga at that time. I just felt this weird energy leave me. I suppose I can describe. I just felt this weird energy leave me. Then December 1st, 2012, I remember it really clear because wherever I looked, there I was. There was absolutely no separation. So it took me a few weeks to figure out how to function until I got back a little bit into this body and could function again. But for a while there, wherever I was that. Like if I got in the car, I was the car. It was really a strange, odd experience of oneness.
Right. So you were in the zone, like you were in a very deep zone, and all it took was roughly 20 minutes a day, right?
Yeah. It's starting out with 5 minutes. It really began with 5 minutes a day. And that's what I tell people. You can start with 2-3 minutes. You just want to go to the point where you start bringing yourself back to the present moment. And when you can't do that anymore, you get up and you do something else. You don't try to force it. Trying to force it makes this stronger. Mm-hmm. So, and that's why I see some of these teachers recommend like a half hour to start, an hour to start. And I'm like, that's too long. It's going to allow this to amplify. It's just a few minutes just to learn to get yourself back into this moment. Story, back to the moment. Story, back to the moment. And that was my simple practice.
So let's talk about when you started to actually experience a physical transformation with your body. What was that like for you? How did you feel as you could see and experience these symptoms begin to leave your experience?
Well, it was pretty quick. If I could describe it, it was very quick. It was like as soon as I heard that voice say "perfect spirit," it was very quick. And then I started to tape off these medicines, and the brain fog was probably the first thing I really noticed was the brain fog. And then I had the insights to start yoga about 2 or 3 months after that. And when I began yoga, I was just, I needed a lot of props because my balance was not so great, but it was getting better and better. And I said within 6 months, I wasn't tipsy anymore. I didn't need my cane anymore after like 3 months of yoga. It was really That's what I say. Probably about 6 months after that, I noticed my balance was starting to improve. And then there's just something really odd I really noticed after I healed, because like I said, my whole left side of the body had no coordination, was completely numb. And I'm being diagnosed with MS. I actually have a video on YouTube of me juggling.
So how long after you were diagnosed were you juggling?
Well, no, I was juggling. Well, I could juggle before MS.
Mm-hmm.
I learned how to juggle when I was younger, but I figure after MS, there's no way I could juggle. For 7 years, no coordination on the left side. But then I was somebody actually signed me up for this little workshop, and it was like juggling with scars or something like that. Some kind of interesting class like that. So I took that and was like, okay, so I can do this. So they had some juggling balls there, and I picked them up, and within 5-10 minutes, I was juggling again. So it was like, oh, interesting. Came back.
That's great. So that's another marker that said you were kind of back on the path and regaining your authority over your body and your mind in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So then you have the moment where you report back to the doctors. Did any of the doctors, once they got over their shock, did they ever have any kind of like inquiry? Were they curious? How did you do this? I want to learn more.
Yeah, so I'll talk about that. It's kind of interesting. So it was my last neurologist appointment. My last neurologist appointment. I think I actually kept that around. I think it was like the summer or fall of 2012, just right before I got off all my medicine and stuff. He quizzed me for 45 minutes trying to figure out what I did, because my scans were clean and my MRIs, they were clean. He's looking at my blood work. He's like, your blood work is better than mine. Only thing I see with you is a non-specific hand tremor. That was it. So he quizzed me for 45 minutes trying to understand. But then I was at a conference in California, and Dr. Gabor Mate, he really understood what I did. He questioned me a little bit, and then he's like, you stopped believing the mind.
Interesting.
So he's the only doctor that I met that actually got what I did, because that's what he talks about. That's his thing now, is showing people how powerful the mind is. And he really talks about, the asthmatic kids. They do a direct correlation. They did a study of pediatrics. There was this big, huge study that he talks about that everyone ignores, but he really promotes it and talks about it, is that you can take asthmatic kids, you can directly correlate it to the stress of the parents. There's a direct correlation there. So he talks about that, how this mind is impacting us and the people around us.
So speaking of parents, I would assume that your parents were around when you went through this transformation. What was their experience like?
They didn't really have any explanation. They couldn't explain it. And that's how I wrote my first book, was people like trying to figure out what I did, went from sick to healthy. So that's when I wrote my first book, was what I did on that experience. So, my first book was I Don't Dwell. I don't know if you can see it yet. I Don't Dwell was my first book. And so, so that's what I wrote, in 2014. I think I read that 2013 and 2014. I wrote that, explaining what I did, because it was after my healing that I went back and read these spiritual books and tried to understand what I did, because I was just marching to my own drummer.
Right. And there's a beauty and a purity behind all that. Charles from the chat room asked, did you do any fasting during this period, or is fasting a part of your practice now?
No, fasting was never part of my journey. Changing my diet was never really part of my journey. From my journey, it was pretty much listening to myself and just really acting on my own wisdom. Like, okay, I need to drink more water. I need to eat less meat. And it was just following those kind of intuitive hits, of less caffeine, and just following things like that. And that's all I did. But I didn't do anything kind of fasting, nothing dramatic. It was, I did something dramatic, getting off of my medicine. That was pretty dramatic, I guess, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I'd say so. So do you drink coffee now, or is that not part of your diet?
I was never a coffee drinker. I'll drink some iced tea, but that's pretty much my only caffeine. I'll have a little bit of iced tea once in a while, or a little chocolate once in a while. That's it pretty much for my caffeine. But mostly it's water that I drink most of the time.
What about your diet? What kind of diet do you have?
I have a normal everyday diet. I don't follow any particular routine or ritual. And that's why I really try to get the mind out of routines and rituals. Like I try not to sit in the same place. I try not to sit the same time of meditation. I don't want the mind to get locked into any kind of grooves of this is how meditation has to be. This is how I have to be. I'm constantly changing things up. I don't want the mind to get comfortable.
Right. That's interesting. So once you went through this, and your body is returning to a state of homeostasis, and you're having this connection, this body-mind experience or mind-body experience, did you then ask yourself, well, what else can I do? Like, what else is on the table for me?
Yeah, it was just like, yeah, at that point, in 2013, 2014, I was really starting to wonder, like, how can I help people? That's why I wrote the book, I Don't Dwell. Then with some encouragement, I started meetup groups and started to do those sessions. And that's what people got out of my sessions was I was never focused on healing. That's the thing. I'm always focused on inner peace because I've realized if you throw up the word healing to people, their mental junk drawer kicks in with all these rules and story about how to heal. And I want to throw out that junk drawer and let you hear yourself. And that's why I'm restarting my healing circle soon. And I know, and astrologically, and I just had the insight to do with starting this month on the 17th, and that's the Saturn square Uranus. And that's exactly my kind of work. Saturn has all these rules, restrictions, builds up mental junk drawer. Uranus comes along and throws out the mental junk drawer. And that's exactly the kind of work that I do, is that I want to throw out your mental junk drawer. So that's what I do at my healing circles is you have all the stuff. Let me throw it out for you.
So in your work, how attached are people to their junk drawer?
Oh, extremely attached. It's an addiction. You get really addicted to this because it's comfortable. Change is hard. The mind is comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's really what I'm seeing. So it is an addiction. You clear this and you get out of the way, but then the mind starts rebuilding it. It's like an old habit that keeps coming back, but eventually it does stop. And for me, it took about 3 months for the junk drawer to be mostly empty. But every day I have this thing that I've developed is like the daily mental shower. We take a physical shower, but do we take a mental shower? What beliefs did I pick up today? What opinions, what stories that don't serve me? Let's get those out of there. Let me go back to my wholeness.
How do you deal with somebody who is really defensive and wants to hold on to something, thinking that that's really important to them and for them? How do you work with somebody like that?
Well, the best way I can work with them, if they're willing to get into a session with me or the healing circle, once they have that experience of what's possible, that from like all this buzzsaw of noise to like in my sessions getting that deep sense of peace, and just let them see the contrast between the two. And then they can see like, okay, this doesn't really serve me. But there's some people, they're just too comfortable with it. And I really can't do much with that if they're really comfortable with it. And unfortunately, the worst people with that I found so far are multiple sclerosis. They have all these stories. They see me and it's like, oh, you're the exception. I could never do that.
Interesting. Very, very interesting.
But I know that's not true. I'm human just like they are. If I can do it, you can do it. There's no one's, above another or below another. We all have these abilities if we can get this out of the way. That's why I will tell people, I don't want you to follow me forever. I just want you to find your path and just see me once in a while. Just talk to me once in a while. That's all. But eventually I just want to get that mind clear. You just go do your thing.
I mean, that's really the way it should be. So let's talk about cross applications, things like attachments around money, abundance, wealth, poverty. Like, I'm sure this is all baseline stuff that people bring to you and shows up. How's your life improved in that area?
Yeah, it's what I'm seeing, that there's no limitations. Only limitations are in our head. Like if you're in this scarcity mindset, you think there's not enough money. Well, I can walk right in. I go right in Manhattan. There's no lack of money in Manhattan. All these $1 billion skyscrapers. So, what I tell people that time is limited, but money is infinite. Money is a renewable resource. You can always acquire more money. And what recipe to money is right here. You know the way to it. It's telling you to go do this, go do that, go do that. And it's not your path. But if you follow this path, there's a synchronicity just happens. It's really hard to explain, just a synchronicity. And one story that really comes to me, it's out there, but I think it's really amusing. When I had my own spiritual center back in 2015 that I don't have now, I had a small office space and there was like a public bathroom, but it was only shared by a couple offices. But one day it wasn't working. So I simply said, somebody needs to fix this toilet. I came back next day, didn't tell anybody about it. It was fixed. Just magically fixed itself somehow, some way. This synchronicity happens. You don't really get into this place of like, how is this going to happen? You just set an intention and it just sort of shows up, which is kind of magical. So that's what I'm talking about, like this week coming up, I want to talk about, dropping the health struggle. Then the next Saturn square Uranus, I'm going to be talking about dropping the money struggle and doing different themes for different areas, because this thing has 1,001 different flavors of how it comes in and shows up. So we focus on those kind of areas. Well, I try to clear the whole junk drawer, but sometimes I try to focus on two little specific areas that are more ingrained, because we have these stories from our parents that, money requires hard work. It requires this education, this skill, which is all craziness and not our truth.
Right.
It's not about working harder. It's about working from this deeper place within you.
Right. So back in the early 2000s, Abraham Hicks was really big. And are you familiar with Abraham Hicks, that whole scene?
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things that somebody gave me a bunch of tapes to listen to, when one of the interesting things that came through that was this idea of forking and forking off. And the radical concept that Abraham and Esther were sort of surfacing was that inside exactly what the right thing is to do, and that if you follow that thing, and it's usually the thing that you resonate with, it's not the thing that you think you should do because whatever the rationalization is, it's the thing that actually feels like the right thing to do. It's not about the head. And when you get into that, it can be very dynamic. And here's where I think some people get hung up. And this is the question I wanted to ask you. It's this idea of being self-serving, right? That I'm just going to follow the things and do the things that just make me feel good or make me, feel theoretically better. But are those really the things that are going to like improve my relationships? Am I just going to become self-centered and narcissistic? And what I like about you is that you seem really grounded and very non-attached to your work in a lot of ways. So I guess the question would be, how do you work with people who, if they think they're going to go down this path, they're going to become a pariah? And then number two, how do you keep your head straight and on your shoulders so that you don't become a pariah?
Right. So it's really about doing that work every day, that the work doesn't stop, because this stuff is constantly building up, thinking that you're more important than someone else or whatever the story may be. But when you get out of this space, it's just sort of like, I saw people really focus on being kind and gentle to yourself, and that eventually radiates out into the world. It's like when you really get into this space, it's really a humble confidence. That's what really happens if you're truly in that space. It's not about bragging. It's like forcing somebody to say, you must do this. It's like you're not attached to it. You're just like, this is my advice to you. You can follow it or not. It's your journey, your path. I'm not attached to it. I can only do what I can do. I can't force anything upon you. But unfortunately, people right now are just so wrapped up in this, they become complicit and we're just seeing a lot of this now with all these restrictions, especially in New York City. It's crazy here.
Yeah. How do you deal with that?
It doesn't bother me because I just realize it's part of the journey, but it's really, the universe is giving them an opportunity to wake up, and they're not taking advantage of that opportunity. They're just following along and just marching along to the collective groupthink. but it's really the universe is giving us the opportunity to discover our path and, you know, our way forward. And if we had a society collectively waking up together during this, society would be completely different. Politics would be completely different. Advertising would be completely different. But it's all fear feeding. It's what it is. It's just feeding all this fear that doesn't serve in support of. So it's really getting out of this group think and marching to your own drummer. I once heard somebody that said it was really funny. Those who go with the flow go down the drain.
Huh. That's interesting. But then there is the other aspect of that, which is sort of finding the path of least resistance. So you can actually find, you know, water finding its own level and rising. And so I think that there's, you know, being a very Piscean metaphor, it's quite dualistic in a lot of ways. Let's talk about sort of the collective mindset. We've got a bunch of people now that are running around in masks, doing what they're told. I watched a video yesterday where a guy was on the street and he was fucking around. He asked a lot of people if they were going to get the vaccine, and I would say that 95% of the people he asked, they're going to get the vaccine or they've gotten the vaccine. So we're in a really, really strange time where there's a lot of mind trash on a social level, and it's almost like we're having to swim not just through our own mind trash, but this kind of detritus of the collective. What kind of tips, or how do you navigate that, Sam?
Yeah, there's no resistance. So if a store says you need a mask to wear, you need to wear a mask to enter the store, I'll wear a mask. I don't fight this system, but I know, you know, I simply don't fight the system. There is no resistance there. It's like, okay, these are your rules. I'll follow your rules, but that's not my truth.
Mm-hmm. At what point does that change for you, or will that ever change? If they say you need 2 vaccines, will you comply? Will you not resist? Where are you with that?
Well, if they said that I needed to do a vaccine to live here, I would live someplace else.
Okay,
I would just go someplace where I can just be me without me forcing to do something that doesn't resonate with my truth.
Well, so it doesn't resonate with your truth, and clearly from your own historical past with big pharma and medical intervention, that wasn't a great fit to begin with.
Right. So I would just say if they're trying to force me to do something, and I know I was on medications that were eventually black labeled, they took off the market because they were so dangerous. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've been on those kind of drugs, and when I'm looking at like vaccine or anything like that, does this resonate for me? Is this something I need to do? And personally, I don't feel it's for me. So if they try to force it on me, I would go someplace where I don't need the vaccine, where I can just be me and not have to comply to their system and keep my independence. It's that path. It's once again, it's that path of least resistance where I'm not fighting the system and say, okay, that's your rules. I don't like your rules. I'm going someplace else.
Right. Let's talk about maybe some success stories that you've had with people that you've worked with. Do any come to mind?
Yeah, there's a few things that come to mind with that. You know, this is the person that came before me that was going to speak before one of my talks talked about, you know, like my first book here, like he read that. I didn't work with him directly, he just read that. And this is a person that was very similar to with me, had a lot of social anxiety, dealing with a lot of people. But he read the book, he did the practices, and the social anxiety went away. And that was so bad, his social anxiety, he was actually able to get back into the workforce. So he was actually able to do those steps, which are very simple and just 5 minutes a day, but very simple stuff. And he did that, and it was fine. But then there's some more deep issues that I solved. You know, working with this woman in her 30s, always had relationships issues, and she didn't understand why she had relationships issues. And it's really the best way I can describe my sessions when I work with people. I don't try to logic things out. When I'm working with somebody, I try to get my mind out of the way. I really get myself into this kind of trance state, if you will. And then it's like my spirit talking to their spirit. And I just saw something very clear in her life that magnified into this story where she didn't feel worthy and deserving of relationships. I was like, because when I was in the space, I'm like, all right, I'm seeing you around 6 or 7 years old. You just moved someplace. and you can't participate in something. What's going on there? She's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. At 6 years old, I was really into ballet. We went to this ballet studio and they were doing a performance, and I was really upset they wouldn't let me participate in the ballet performance. And she didn't realize that experience from 6 years old was carrying into her 30s with relationships that she wasn't good enough, deserving, or whatever it may be. So I was able to see that and just push that away, say that's the past, that's not who you are now, and just sort of clear that memory. That was a nice one. But there's some times where I usually like to awaken their own inner healer, but sometimes I simply can't do that. So I once had an acquaintance. I know she called me on the phone. She's like, I just took all these pills. So I know she was in a really bad spot. So I got her help. I called the ambulance for her. So I was like, okay, so what hospital she's going to be in? I'm not a relative of her. Which hospital she's going to be in? So I had an idea in Philadelphia where she was, probably the hospital. So I went there and I just was doing my intuitive stuff and talking to the front desk a little bit, trying to get some information. I was like, yeah, she's here. So then I sat in the waiting room and I was just doing my healing work on her when I was in the waiting room. But obviously there's no contact there. So what I heard, eventually they eventually told me that she was there, because I figured that out pretty quickly. But they said, you'll probably see her tomorrow. She'll be in the ICU and you can probably see her tomorrow. Well, anyway, I see her the next day in a regular hospital room yelling at me, angry at me, because what I ended up doing was I took all of her overdose symptoms, if you will, and I pulled them into myself, and then I transmuted them. So she didn't get from the ICU room. She went to a regular room and was really upset with me. But what I see now, not to do that now, because a few months later she did it again, but this time I didn't interfere.
So you took that on, and you accepted some responsibility for that in some ways in that moment. Yeah.
Because I know it wasn't her time and that she was being too reactive. But the next time I saw when she did that, it was really more tuned into. It was like, all right, I know it's not going to kill her. It's going to make her really, really uncomfortable for a while. So I'm just going to let her be. Mm-hmm. And the second time, the next time she tried it a few months later, she got it. She understood that she had bigger purposes. So I didn't interfere that time. But it just, I guess maybe that time I did interfere, that was to the point where it was too much. It would have done her in. And I know she had a bigger purpose. So that's why I dug in. And you said something too in a reading to me that really resonated with me later, is that I somewhat call myself like the burden collector. It's sort of like I collect these burdens from people, then I transmute them. And that's sort of what I do when I go into these spaces where sometimes where the mind is just too active, just too busy. If I really need to, I can get in there and clean up some of the muck, but that mind's going to bring it back. I know that. It's going to give them like a temporary Band-Aid effect until the mind chimes in again. So I can give them a temporary reprieve, but they're really going to do that own work. It all gets down to eventually you're going to have to do your own work. I can come to a certain point, but eventually you're going to, it's like I can take you to 90 feet to the end, but you're going to walk the last 10 feet on your own. There's 10, you have to be solo and say, look, Mom, no hands when you're riding that bike.
Right. And what you're talking about in a lot of ways is really sort of the antithesis of like the Tony Robbins model, where Tony Robbins wants you as a devotee and a customer for life, right? I mean, and I've had the same sort of approach that you do with your work as I do with astrology. Like, I want to give you an experience so that within 60 minutes or so, like, you can take it and hopefully you can work with that. And I don't really want to see you again for another 6 months or a year, right? I mean, unless I'm doing some coaching with you, and that's a whole different thing. But I love the purity of your approach, because you want that person to walk that extra 10 feet. And you don't necessarily, I mean, you can take the burden on, you can transmute it. I know what that's like. But ultimately, this is what the game is about, for everybody to find that teacher or that guru within themselves. What's interesting about you, and I talk about this on my show on Sunday night, is that you were born in 1967, where there was that Pluto conjunction with Uranus in Virgo. And I've talked about the people that are born during that time, roughly about 1964 to about 1969. This is a really interesting group, excuse me, a group of people who are profound alternative healers. And a lot of it has been triggered by the transit of these outer planets with Neptune and with Pluto and Capricorn coming in and starting to trine and light up these sort of radical principles of transformation and healing, which is Virgo. So you're a perfect example of what I was talking about on Sunday night. And I think it's great. I think there are a group of people now who are really coming into their own around this information and around practicing it. And so my question is for you is, like, how many other people have you sort of connected with and worked with that are kind of around the same age group as you?
Yeah, I have a few of them, but I still see the few that I have connected with are still a little bit wrapped up in here. There's still some ego that they have to get that following. They have to get people to tag around with them constantly. And I really don't want that. And I see that they still got some work to do.
Right.
That's what. And it's interesting. A lot of people that do come to me are people that want to deepen their spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm.
Because they still got some stuff hanging around, because once again they get locked into these routine rituals. That's why I don't let the mind sit in the same spot every day, do the same amount of time, because the mind will get those kind of grooves. And I'm like, whatever you're doing spiritually, throw it out. Let's do something different, something new. And that everything can be a spiritual practice. It doesn't have to be sit there quietly. I was once talking to a guy at a conference who liked to watch football. I taught him how to use football watching as a spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally resonate with this. And I'll talk with people about meditation, and they immediately think, oh, well, I'm not very good at meditating. Well, it's like, that's not really, meditation is when you can drop your mind, whether it's with gardening or walking or bike riding. I mean, when I weight lift, I get great ideas. My mind gets quiet. So I think being adaptive and redefining these things can be really helpful for people.
Right. And it's just really about being more mindful than meditation, because I met many people that meditate that have severe anger issues or some kind of other issues. A lot of angry meditators, because they're not learning to be here in this moment as you walk through life. They're yelling and protesting at everything. They're not comfortable with this moment. They're
Right.
always protesting against it. So, and that's just learning to be mindful in each moment. Like, where are my feet? Where are my hands? Because you're either up in here or you're here in this moment. You can't be in two places at once. The body's always here. The mind is this time traveler, usually in the past or the future, but rarely here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Let's take a look at your YouTube channel, because you got a pretty buffed out YouTube channel.
Which channel? The Miracle Man channel, the Head Trash channel. Oh,
So
that's the Head Trash channel. I'm putting all my stuff on the Miracle Man channel now.
Okay, so why don't we look at that? I'll close this, but this is here, and there's a lot of videos there, and I do want to talk about Lori a little bit, and her role in your work and what she brings to the table.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. But yeah, so what I'm really focusing now on Sam the Miracle Man, I'm just doing these 5 to 10 minute talks each day, just adding to that. So that's what I'm doing over in the Miracle Man channel. And that's what I'm doing, like my Facebook group and things like that, is just trying to figure out how to give back to more, because I just want people to march to their own drummer. And yeah, for Lori, she co-wrote that book with me. She's good with astrology. She's good with readings. So that's where she comes into the pictures, that intuitive side of it.
Mm-hmm. So here we go. Looks like you're doing a video every couple days.
Every day.
Every day. Okay, you got a little astrology in there. Are you ready to heal depression versus anxiety? Which one is worse? What I wish I knew when I was diagnosed with bipolarity. Let's tap into one of these videos for a moment. Let's see you do your thing here. Here we go. Let me just make sure I have the right. You know what I have to do before I do that? I have to activate the audio. Okay, here we go.
Hey everyone, I'm Sam, the Miracle Man. I hope you're doing well. let's create a miracle in your life today. Today I was thinking about, if I was newly diagnosed with a chronic disease like bipolar, multiple sclerosis, what would I want to know? Because when I was diagnosed with those things, all I read was about all these horror stories, if you will. Like when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2004, I remember that. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks trying to figure out what I had or didn't have. At that point in my life, this eye was jumping around, this eye was blurry, my whole left side of the body was numb. I couldn't walk. I mean, my whole body was just shutting down. Then I remember, it was like I think it was like a Saturday, like the 3rd week, or maybe it was the 2nd Saturday I was there, 2nd or 3rd week I was there. I think it might have been a 3rd week, but I remember the doctor, it was definitely a weekend because it wasn't my normal doctor. And he was checking me over, and he's like, "Oh, we concluded you have multiple sclerosis." And he says, "You'll be okay. We'll get you to rehab." And he just promptly walked out. No bedside manner with no bedside manner or anything like that, and it's news is hits you like a wave, it's like really this tremendous wave. It's almost like a grief that hits you, and I was dealing with bipolar as well, so it really made me unstable, it really threw me into a depression. It's like, wow, I thought life was all gonna be over, like, this was it. Because I was reading all these horror stories, at that time, like, within 10 years, a lot of people end up in wheelchairs. I'm reading about all these horror stories, medicine for the rest of your life, depending on the type of multiple sclerosis, your health declines, and like it doesn't go relapsing and remitting, it just sort of continues downhill. But for any chronic disease, the mind takes on that worst information and it really fills that mental junk drawer with all sorts of stuff. This is going to happen. You'll need this. You'll need to do this. You'll need to do this. Just keeps piling all this fear related stuff and stress inducing junk. It's just junk. It just fills the head. So that's why I'm really on a mission, if you will, to let people know if you're alive, there is hope, there is possibility, but you can't believe this stuff. You need to let this stuff go because it does not serve you. You need to take that mental junk drawer and throw it out the window, but the mind will try to keep building it back up. If I was newly diagnosed, I would just say all that information out there is just that. It's information. It's not your truth. Realize that it's not your truth. But I believed that was my truth for 7 years, and my health continued to decline. None of the medicine, none of the doctors, none of the therapy was helping because I was locked into the story that this is incurable. Now, that's just a story that it's incurable. Because it's been about 10 years since I shifted my mindset, and I have no symptoms of MS today, bipolar, all this other stuff. Don't need this box load of medicines, don't need the daily injectable, don't need my cane, don't need a cooling vest, don't need to avoid hot weather, all that nonsense because I'm fine today. I realized that I'm perfect spirit, just as you're perfect spirit, and we inhabit this body. This body will come and go, but perfect spirit will remain. So just realize once you tap into this deeper place that is the real you, life will change in magical ways that you have no explanation. And these magical ways are the miracle. You can create this miracle in your life if you're willing to empty out the mental junk drawer and taking those daily steps to empty the drawer out. And those steps are very simple. I began with 5 minutes a day of just learning to be present in this moment right here, right now. If you're up in your mental junk drawer, you are not here. You're in the story. You're all in this anxiety inducing nonsense. It's creating stress. And when you're dealing with a chronic illness, the worst thing you want is more stress, more of those hormones running through the body that diminish your immune system, make you prone to more things, more disasters. It's when you start believing this. But when you start letting this stuff, slowly letting this stuff go, you start trusting your own wisdom more, your life will turn around in ways that don't make sense, because you are a divine being. You are not this flesh and bone. This flesh and bone is just your vehicle to carry spirit around. And maybe the term spirit doesn't resonate with you, it doesn't make sense. It's the one who sees through the eyes. Look at old photographs of yourself. Where did you go? No place, because the spirit is never changing. It continues onward, one step after another. The body is always changing. Millions of cells every day are being replaced. This body is in constant fluid, but the energy within you is constant, if you will. It's the steady energy that never disappears. It's a permanent energy, and it goes into different forms. So this body will drop away, the energy will move on to something else, because it's this energy. It just keeps on moving, this consciousness. And everything we see is conscious. So that's really what I want people to understand is, don't get locked up in the stories that you're reading. It's just information that's not serving you, information that is putting you down, telling you the worst case scenarios, instilling that fear. What I want people to see, you're alive. There's hope. There's possibilities. You just have to put one foot in front of the other. What's best for you? Not based on that information out there or the nonsense up here, but in this deeper place. What is best for you? You live in this body. What is best for you? And really ask yourself that. What is best for you? All right. I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye for now.
All right.
Hey, everyone.
Very nice video. Very nice video. Do you ever catch yourself having thoughts like, oh my God, I'm having this thought now. I don't need this thought. How does that work for you now? How do you sort of maintain the defragging in your brain at this point?
Well, when I catch myself in a thought, it's a pretty quick habit now. When I notice I'm caught in that story and it will constantly grab you, it's like I come back, okay, where am I standing? Where am I at right here, right now? It's just constantly practice of bringing myself back, bringing it back, because I'm either here or here in this moment.
Right. Good. Why don't we take a few? You know what? I want to get to some questions, but in order for me to do that, I have to go into the void. So you're going to go into the void with me, Sam.
All right.
Here we go. How was that?
Void. That's perfect.
Yeah, we just flushed all of our mind trash in those few brief moments of being in the void. So why don't if you guys have any questions for Sam, why don't you go ahead and put them in chat so I can actually look at them and read them and even put them up on the screen. So let's see. Do we have any questions, or is this a great opportunity to ask Sam some questions?
Well, I have some other interesting stories. I think we heard an interesting story that sort of got squashed away when I was run over by a van about 6 years old. After my surgery that night, I was in really bad, dire shape, but I remember distinctly opening my eyes to a very bright room and then seeing three beings on each side of me, removing my life support. Then I remember distinctly in the morning, my mom asking me, why'd you remove your tubes? Why'd you remove your life support? And she didn't ask, she just asked me the question, why'd you remove your life support? She didn't step back and say, how could he have done that? But I believe mom had to be right, so it had to be me. So that memory was suppressed. It was kind of an interesting experience that I later learned what that meant was you don't need the outside world to heal yourself. You have all the resources within you. But I was way too young for that lesson.
So was that when you were having a near-death experience, or was that something else?
No, that was a near-death experience, definitely, because that was right after surgery. My chances of survival that night were very small. And so
Mhm.
for them to remove my life support and for me to still be here,
Mhm.
this tells a little bit of divine intervention, if you will, or whatever these beings were, angels, whatever you want to call them.
Mhm. Mhm.
But they were giving me a lesson at that time that was just suppressed when mom came in with that question.
So here's a question. What does he think would help with fear of heights and driving at heights?
Yeah, I still have a little issue with that too, because that's one of the things from the MS. My perception isn't as good as it once was because of all the damage. But once you're dealing with heights and even driving at heights, it's more deeper work because it's almost like an automatic response in the mind to keep safe. It's almost like a keep safe mechanism. So it's really about doing that deep work that nothing is going to happen to you and that you're safe. It's okay. But it is very deep work of seeing where that story originated from. Where was the basis for that story? Maybe something happened when you were 10, 12, 13 years old, where maybe you were in a precarious situation with heights and you felt danger. You felt a sense of danger is what I'm sensing. It felt a sense of danger. So your mind has developed that into a habit that's dangerous. I need to keep myself safe.
Okay. Here's another one. This one is probably something, or it's probably a question you're asked in various forms, but might be kind of a common one. It's about helping people that are close to us. So CC Jones, how can I help my 36-year-old son who is suffering from anxiety and depression without being too intrusive?
Yeah. So this comes down to really being the example for him, and really realize too, when you're really kind and gentle with yourself, that radiates out and impacts people as well without you really doing anything. It's that energy, that grace within us that sort of emanates and descends from you. And I always see like grace is constantly descending upon and down us, but we usually have the umbrella up with the head trash. Oh, I got this, I can do this. But if we let that go, this grace just descends and you can just radiate out. So that's one of the ways you can indirectly help them. But ultimately, it's going to be their journey. Like it'd be almost like propping them up a little bit, but eventually they're going to have to learn to take those last 10 steps themselves. That you won't be able to dissipate it completely for them, but you can at least make it easier for them. And just notice on your own self, where are you judging them? Where are you being critical of them? It's really about being kind to yourself and allowing that radiate out of not judging him. But which really was coming to me is not build on that story. Like anxiety or depression are just labels or just stories. It's almost feeding your own mental junk drawer, feeding their mental junk drawer, and you really want to let that go. As it's just a story that you have this anxiety, this depression, and it's just a temporary state of emotional being, if you will. It's not your permanent reality. That even within them is this perfect spirit. They're just so wrapped up in the body. And I was there for, I suffered for 37 years with that stuff. So, but if you're alive, you just have this all as possible, but it's for them to take that journey. But don't keep reliving that story either. Don't keep living the label of anxiety, depression. Let that go. Just love them for who they are without defining them. It's about letting go of all those definitions and be the example. Radiate kindness out. And and this was one thing that my mom was good. She was always worrying, but she was always supportive. She was always a cheerleader, but she would also be very worried. So what I'm seeing, it would be better if you're just always a cheerleader. You can do this. You can do that. You can do that. That's one thing my mom gave me. She was a good cheerleader.
Good. Here's another question. Does he replace his thoughts with something or dissolve them?
Well, once again, if you're trying to replace thoughts, it's thoughts chasing thoughts. So you're keeping the thoughts locked in there. It's just about dissolving thoughts, of not paying attention to them. It's really, when I learned meditation, it was like a thought chasing a thought, and you don't want to keep amplifying that story. You just want to let them dissolve. And dissolve is just not paying attention to them. Here's a thought. There's a thought. It's like, which thoughts are you going to grab onto and make them part of you? Because even my mind is still chiming up with these thoughts, but I'm not grabbing onto them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Krishnamurti, Krishnamurti's an interesting character because he's really heady. If you've ever read Krishnamurti, he's really heady, But one of the things he talks about is just observing your thoughts, just observing your thoughts and watching your thoughts. And he thought that that was the most instructive thing that we could all do. And there's a lot of recordings of Krishnamurti out there. And have you ever read or listened to any of his stuff at all?
Yeah, I've listened to him. I've read his stuff. Yeah, it is a little heavy. And that's what I said. You can try to watch thoughts. And I find that's a little difficult for people because they're so identified with thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I said. When you see the thoughts, you're caught in the story. Get yourself back into this moment. Where are your feet? Where are your hands? What do you hear? What are you seeing? Something, because that might be a little bit too abstract for people too. It's so easy to get sucked into those thoughts. Suddenly you don't become the observer. You become those thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. Do we have any other questions? Here we go. Sandra asks, do you use affirmations?
No, affirmations were not part of my journey. And there's a book that really talks about how to do more effective process for affirmations. It was called The Buddha and the Spiritual Badass or something along those lines. It was a really good book that talked about affirmations, because affirmations will program the subconscious, but I think it's a little bit slower. And that will work, but it's a slower, longer process. I really like getting back into this moment right here and try to force instead of trying to force the mind a certain way, you just learn to operate from here and now. I think is best. It's sort of like the Eckhart Tolle approach, just being present.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, you're a lot more personable than Eckhart Tolle. I found Eckhart Tolle's business model a little repulsive, but hey, maybe that's just my own judgment around my own relationship with receiving millions of dollars for just sitting in front of people and talking. Let's see. Do we have any other questions for Sam, the Miracle Man? Do we have any other? I like Krishnamurti too. Krishnamurti's an interesting character. He was chosen by the Theosophists to be the world savior. That was his role. It was between him and his brother. And they actually went to India. I think it was Ledbetter and Annie Besant. They went to India. They found him and his brother. They brought him back to England. And they eventually relocated to Ojai, California. And there was this idea that, there would be this world religion after World War II. And they needed a world savior. And it was between him and his brother. And then his brother dies, and then Krishnamurti begins to reject the Theosophists, and he kind of moves out and into his kind of own experience. But it's a really fascinating story in terms of American spirituality and kind of this global paradigm of this world savior, which he rejects, and thankfully he did that. Let's see, any other questions? Do you have any other questions here? Getting a lot of really good. Here's our man, Masaki. Awesome story.
Yeah, so it's a story, but it's the thing though. I'm nothing. I want people to realize I'm nothing special. Whatever I've accomplished, they can accomplish too.
Yeah.
And I just want to get you partway there to find your own path, your own recipe, to realize your lighthouse is always shining a light forward, and your soul never goes dark. I think there's a really big myth out there, the dark night of the soul, and I don't see that. It's actually the dark night of the mind. It's all this stuff creating a lampshade over your light. So I want you to shift, like, it's not like your soul going dark. It's impossible. Your soul is always this bright light illuminating, and this is your shadows, and it's constantly slamming into the rocks. Why this is your lighthouse, this thing is just constantly slamming into the rocks that you're usually not good enough, not deserving, not worthy, some sort of lack, you're missing something. But you're not missing anything. You're just missing, tapping into your own truth.
Yeah. Amen. So this one has to do with astrology. What did the astro chart do for him?
Yeah. So what? Yeah, you can talk. So what I found about my astro chart was give me some more clarification. Me and Robert were talking about this. I don't know if he has my chart available or not, because I still have the printout here. I still listen to it once in a while. I still reflect and ponder it once in a while. that I have all the stuff like why things happen a certain way, like hearing perfect spirit, what was going on right at that instant. That was a big shift in what was going on the instant of the last day in November when I felt that energy just leave the body, then December 1st, 2012, of just being one with all that is. So astrology to me, speaking to Robert, gave me some clarity of what was going on with the energy of the universe, if you will, and how it was being supported in that, I guess you could say.
Sandra has another question here, which is, do you have specific tools in addition to meditation to help people on their path?
Well, yeah, there's videos out there. One of the things I talk about, there's all sorts of tools. Like if you don't know yourself as perfect spirit, and you don't get that concept of spirit. I was talking a little bit about that on the video, is taking old photographs of yourself and really doing that deep inquiry. Where did I go? And keep asking yourself like sort of like a samadhi question. Where did I go? Look at all these bodies. Where did I go? Where did I go? Until you have that really deep insight. No place. I am that consciousness that inhabits that body. And that's the samadhi. That's the waking up. And I do have some more tools. This is my first book, I Don't Dwell. You can get this PDF free. It's in my Facebook group. I have that as a file there. You can just download it and read it for free. So I do have all these videos, and in my group, I'm going to do a new weekly show there. And it's all about, how can I support people on this journey? And that's what it is. It's your own journey. I'm just here to help point you back to yourself.
Sandy has an interesting comment here, and kind of a tragic one. My husband could not handle anything unpleasant. Passed with MS in 2018. Glad to hear your success, Sam, after many years of caregiving, co-struggle. What would you share with people who are caregivers with somebody who has MS?
Yeah, it is difficult. It's a very difficult disease, and for my wife, it was really her escapism. She just couldn't deal with it, because that's really what it is. But it's really about learning to be. And the best thing I think for caregivers is be that steady state of presence for them, that compassion, that kindness, because they're fighting all sorts of internal demons, if you will. If you have MS and the body's attacking itself, I would like to see if there's a study out there on this, but what is their level of self-criticism? That's what I really want to know. Is everyone that I spoke to that has an autoimmune disease has an element of self-criticism. I have yet to see anyone that loves themselves with an absolute love of themselves with an autoimmune disease.
So I guess the mother of all autoimmune diseases is ALS. Where are you with ALS? I mean, it seems like it's just a cul-de-sac. Have you ever worked with anybody who had ALS, and what are your thoughts around it?
Yeah, I've never worked with anyone with ALS. I need to go deeper, if you will, and see what it's feeling with We'll see with that. It feels more than autoimmune. Feels like there's a neurological component as well for this. I'm just being shown like scrambled wires. I'm just seeing scrambled wires, like something in the nervous system when they were born wasn't born properly, if you will. It's the best way I can describe it. It's either like I'm seeing like the brain spinal column. I'm just seeing the way it was born was a little skewed. That's the best way I can describe it. It's almost like it's a skewed system, but then you throw in the inner environment into it, and it sort of creates more issues, more problems, is what I'm seeing. But I haven't worked with anybody with ALS. That would be an interesting to dive into that, but it won't be me diving into it. Like I said, I try to get this out of the way and allow this to take over. It's just unusual when I allow this to take over, because I can share another interesting story. People seem to like my mystical stories that happen with me. Somebody was in my in-person meditation when I could do those. Mm-hmm. And afterwards she's coming to me and she's like, I'm still having these back problem. So I just put my hands on her back and I just asked for orthopedics, doctors from the other side that specialize in orthopedics that come through. And I just put my hands on the back and I just felt her spine just come into alignment. And that's just some of the weird things that happen. I just can't explain them. It's just this mysticism that happens. And that's one thing I got really from your reading, Robert. It was really good for me, was I need to start living more in my 12th house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, which is pretty prominent actually in a real deep, soulful, healing kind of way. When you're there, then you're really in touch with your soul, and you're really in touch with that potential that can come through and say, "Hey, put your hand here on this person," or whatever you need to do in that moment. Now you're really, connecting with that link with your spirit slash soul. So yeah, I mean, it was a natural fit. Let me just see here. Anything else? This is interesting. This gets back to the collective here, Sam. If this vax is going to cause serious autoimmune diseases, that resonates because people who are taking it don't seem to love themselves or believe in their own self, which is kind of an interesting concept because now we're into things like I don't know, self-abasement, deep self-criticism, fear, a lot of fear. Do you think it's possible for somebody to take these vaccines, and this is kind of a radical departure, to take the vaccines and have a mindset that the vaccine won't affect them? Do you think that that's possible?
Yeah, your belief system creates your reality. There's a direct correlation. What you believe will become your reality. If you really believe that, and I see even before the vax, just in New York City, there's so much fear advertising from the state of New York about wearing a mask, social distancing, washing your hands. There's just so much fear in New York City, what I'm seeing on the airwaves. That alone is causing immune system issues. It's creating so much fear that you must do this, you must comply. And then if you don't do this, you're a bad person, and all these stories, you're gonna get someone else sick, and all this stuff building. So it's even before the vaccine. The vaccine, to me, that vaccine just feels off. That's the best way I can describe it. It just feels off. It feels like, don't give me that. It just feels off. Something, we're not being told the truth with that. And I even see, even if the cases continue to go down, the propaganda is going to keep going up, building more fear, instilling more fear, because I see the cases going down, but we're not going to be seeing that reality. We're going to be still hearing the fear reality. Now we're seeing on TV now to wear 3 or 4 masks. They're coming up with more craziness of how many masks you need to wear. They keep building that fear. And that's what it really is, just keep building fear and fear. And it's actually, what they're doing. I don't know if they probably know what they're doing. I'm sure they know what they're doing. But the more fear you create, the more stress you create, the weaker the immune system, the more you're going to pump up the pharmaceuticals.
Absolutely.
So it's doing so the few people are going to be in control of the masses. And it's really, this is the time for us all to collectively wake up and say, hey, this isn't for me. I don't like the rules around here. I need to get out of here. If they're going to support me in my journey, then I need to just get out of here. But this has been going on now for over a year. And even before that, you can even see it with the advertising before COVID. They're creating the sense of lack with advertising. Oh, you need this, you need this. It creates that sense of lack. And it becomes part of your mental junk drawer that you're lacking in some way, that you're not whole and complete. When you were born, you are whole and complete. You have everything within you. Then people start adding stories that you're missing something. No, you're not missing anything. You need to throw that out. You got everything. And sometimes you do need some resources from outside. Maybe you need to go take this herb. You need to go do this. You need to go do that. Like the outside world is your tools. Like I need this, maybe I need a reading for clarity. I need to figure out what's going on in the energy of the world so I can get some clarity onto that. So it's really just seeing that the world is there for you to use as a tool, not to become your crutch, if you will. It's just like, I need this. I can't explain it, but I need to go to this store. I don't know why, but just go there. And you go to the store, it's like, oh, because I need this. I need to go read this book. I need to go do that. And it makes you can't explain it. It's just like letting go of the how and just trusting the wisdom. Because one thing I want to talk about earlier that we didn't talk about was this wisdom rises up first. This voice comes first. Then this voice comes second, telling you why the first voice is wrong. You just got to learn to get that practice of discernment of, this is my truth, and my mind wants me to believe this story. It's almost like you're not following your passion because you're doing things that you're told that you're supposed to do. You go get this education, do this job because your father did this, and now you need to do this to keep the business going or whatever it may be. These stories that we lock in, but You were born for a reason. I want everybody to see, where was born for a reason, for a purpose. And if you're following this, you're not marching to your own drummer. You're here on earth for a specific reason and purpose. And most people don't accomplish their life mission because they're so busy people pleasing, taking care of others' needs before their own. It's almost in the place we were talking about before, Robert, being selfishness, really focusing on you. But you have to focus on you first to make yourself strong. But then when you focus on yourself, eventually that goes away. And this humbleness comes, and this gentleness, that it's not about you anymore. It's like, how can I help others? How can I help others in their journey? How can I uplift them? You become a cheerleader for others.
Right. I've always felt that selfishness is an outgrowth of people who are not really feeding themselves. They're not really being self-aware and involved in self-care. And that selfishness is this sort of outgrowth of that. And that it's really this externalization of this impoverished relationship with the things that they really need. And so it comes out in this really distorted kind of way, but it never really feeds or gets to the thing that they actually really need. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah.
It almost feels like, satisfying a false need. That's what's coming. It's like satisfying a false need that isn't going to bring them lasting happiness and contentment. It's just chasing an illusion.
Yeah. It's the opposite of being self-directed. So do we have any more questions for the Miracle Man? Well, he's got here. Let me put a little comment up here. I've been an RN for over 38 years, working at the bedside at teaching hospitals. Everything Sam is saying is 100% true. I wish Sam would teach this to medical and nursing students. Well, I think that would be great. I'm not sure the AMA would like that, though.
No, it's all about, they're all supported by the pharmaceuticals, unfortunately. But one of the good comments I heard, too, was, a vet reached out to me. He's like, you need to help us with this trauma. So when you write your books, make it very simple for us to learn how to get out of this on our own. And that's when I try to write my books. I try to write it in a very simple way. I try not to write in a heady way, because the mind wants to make it complicated.
Right.
I'm really fortunate. I never had a spiritual teacher that could make it complicated. You need to go sit in meditation for an hour. You need to hold your hands a certain way. You need to do this. You need to do that. It's all nonsense. It's all about the simplest action you can take. What's that one step you can take that will change the directory of your life? And what's coming to me is that destiny is not fixed. Mm-hmm. No matter what you're going through, destiny is fluid. It's the step that you take today is going to impact down the road. So even though it makes no sense today, the best analogy I can give for this is the gym. You go to the gym one day, you're not going to be transformed. You go like 3 times in a month, you're not going to see transformation. But if you go every day, you're not going to see that transformation in the mirror. But you look in the mirror in 30 days, you're like, wow, look what I accomplished every day. But every day, you're not going to notice that improvement.
Right. So there's a really interesting story that's related to that, and it's also related to the mind. And they did a study where people imagined that they were lifting weights every day, and they imagined themselves lifting a certain amount of weight. And then they had people who were actually working out at the gym doing the same thing during the same period of time. And they found that people who were visually or visualizing the working out, they attained the same level of strength that people who actually worked out at the gym did. And it's kind of hard to believe on one level, but on another level, it actually makes a lot of sense.
Right. It makes perfect sense. The mind can't tell the difference between reality and fantasy. And that's why people can get really wrapped up in here and just amplify their stories. But that's where visualization can work. You can really see yourself a new way, but you really need to get some of this mental junk out of the way before you can really do that. And a lot of people have problems with law of attraction because they're thinking one way, but their mind's telling another thing, and this creates a conflict.
Mm-hmm. Here, I want to ask you a question about addiction, because I think that's a big issue for a lot of people. For you were inadvertently addicted to the benzos and some of your SSRIs, but there are people with very serious addictions fentanyl, oxy. And then there are other addictions that are perhaps more subtle, but really potentially damaging. And I've worked with a number of men who have addictions with pornography. Have you ever ran across people, specifically men, who have that kind of addiction? And how would you work with someone like that?
Yeah, so I've never worked with anybody with that addiction, but to me, the greatest addiction is addiction to our thoughts, because the thoughts can kill us. They nearly killed me. So I think the greatest addiction is thoughts. But for all those other things, it's really going in there and find the root, what's missing, what's lacking. Because usually with an addiction, there's usually because they think there's something lacking or missing in their life, that they're not completely happy or satisfied. Or maybe the opposite end of the spectrum is maybe life is very difficult and it was a form of escapism. And eventually, because the way these things are designed is to keep you addicted, keep you fed on it. And then it starts to wire the system. So that's where I don't want to toot my own horn, but that's where you need somebody like me that can come in there and break up that wiring, that can go in there in this deeper place and say, I see the wiring that's going there. Let's see, where can I clip this? Where can I sever that connection? Right. And it's really doing that deep energetic work of severing that connection. Because I had a girlfriend that was an alcoholic. The relationship didn't last too long because, I was with her, then she had problems. So she went into rehab for 30 days. But as soon as she got out of rehab and we went to a restaurant, I saw her looking at the bar. I saw her eyes, it didn't break the addiction one bit, because she was still, as soon as I took her someplace where there's alcohol, her eyes went fixed right there, because it was more talk therapy. It wasn't really getting to the root of the issue of trying to put that new pathway in there. And I think that's where it's really lacking. And that just gives me an insight. How can I teach people to create new pathways, new insights? And the way you do that is really learning to be present. And eventually that will cut that cord, but that's a slower process. So you need some kind of energy work or some kind of healer, if you will, that can go in there and rewire. And I really don't like the word healing, because like I said, it has so many.
It's loaded. It's a loaded phrase.
It's too loaded. I'd rather find a way where they can find peace without needing something to substitute to give them that peace. Find that natural peace within them.
Yeah. All right. Last call for questions for Sam, the Miracle Man. Shelley, we have any more questions or comments from the Peanut Gallery, Chatlandia? Do you have anything you want to ask or share? So let me just quickly, Sam, I've got headtrashanonymous.org. Is that the right website for you?
Yeah, that's the website for me. I just spent a little time on there. That's the website. Really, explaining to people that they're not their story. That the less chatter they have up here, the less stress, and the less stress you have, the body will naturally begin to recover and heal itself. Absolutely. It's like when you cut your finger with like a paper, you don't sit there and dwell. Yeah, that's my site there. It's time to remember who you are, that you are perfect spirit, that you are whole and complete. And that's my second book there, Break the Habit of Negative Thought Addiction. Yeah.
And then there you are with Lori.
Yes, that's us.
A couple of happy people. Look at that.
Yeah, that's when you're happy when you don't have the head trash defining you. That's really what it is, where the head trash no longer defines you. Right. And then you can really truly be happy. You can truly live. I don't think you can really live if you got all this junk going on out there.
I agree with you 100%. Sam, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show today, and such a great gift that you've brought to me, and you've brought to everybody in Chatlandia, and the simple wisdom that's available when you start removing things that keep you from remembering who you are. I mean, it's really pretty basic, but it's also very profound. And thanks for your journey, and thanks for your gift, and thanks for being here.
All right. Well, thank you, Robert. You gave me a lot to chew on in your reading. I recommend that for people. It gave me some insights, gave me some clarity. I know we'll be reaching out to you probably every 6 months to give me some more of those little insights, those little nuggets of what's going on in my own world that I'm not seeing. But it's all good. So yeah, so people can check me out. And I'm here for them. I'm usually an open book, and I can help them wherever I can help them.
Good deal. All right, Sam, you take good care,
Right.
and we'll see you somewhere down the line. We'll check back in with you here on this show as well. Okay.
Yeah, it sounds great. All right. Thank you, Robert. Bye.
All right, that was Sam Shelley. What a cool show, huh? See, that's every now and then you find somebody who's just, I wish I could get rid of this. I don't know. Susan, I like your comment, but I don't know how to get rid of these. I'm about to figure that out. Every now and then you run across a real gem. And, once I did the reading with Sam, I'm like, I got to have this guy on the show because his story was so fantastic. So fantastic. I'm just going to put my own name in here. It's the only way I know how to do this. There we go. Easy. So when I heard his story, it's like, this is people have to hear it. I need to find out more about it. And it was like hidden treasure. And sometimes that's the way life works. Hidden treasure comes to you. And I bet Sam could attest to that. All right. We'll be back on Sunday night with Sunday Night Astro Live. And of course, there's a lot of astrology that we'll be covering on Sunday night. And on Tuesday, I will be with David Palmer on his channel. So if you don't have High Vibe TV, which is his app, I think you can get that from the App Store. And I think there may be a free trial with David's thing. I don't know how that works, but we'll figure that out. But I'll be with him on Tuesday. And I think that's a pre-record, if I'm not mistaken. And then on Sunday night, not this coming Sunday, what are we talking about here? Where are we? He'll be on with me, I guess, the 21st. So that would be next Sunday night. So he'll be on with me on next Sunday night. Not this Sunday night, but next Sunday night on Sunday Night Astro Live. And I swear to God, we could have recorded our phone call the other night, and it would have been a show. It would have been a show. I mean, we were clicking and spitting out some interesting stuff at a pretty high level. And David's really inspirational in terms of his real commitment to astrology. It's really something. All right. So I'll be back on Sunday night. You guys have a great weekend. Try to stay warm. Freezing out here in Texas. On Monday, it's going to be at 5 degrees. I've only been in one other place that was as cold as that. That was Eastern Washington in December of 1990. And it was 4 degrees. It was cold. The trees here are frozen. I've got icicles hanging off the trees. And my garden is shot. Oh, well. Spring's just around the corner, or so they say. All right. Use your head in order to discern what's real. Your heart to stay on what's possible. Once again, thank you, Sam Shelley, the Miracle Man, for being a part of today's show. We'll see you guys on Sunday Night Astro Live. Take care for now.